I know, me too. Hey, Martha. Let's see. Hopefully we'll be done.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and call this training to order. Do you have a different agenda for this?
There should be one on here. I put one on each.
Okay. We're here for a Taft Municipal School Board Special Meeting Work Session. It's March 8th, 2025. For the record, it's 2:35 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Call for the roll, please.
President Flores,
Yes,
Vice President Sprague. Yes.
we're here.
Here. Saying what you said.
Here.
First Member King.
Just
Here.
following it.
Here.
Item C is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll go and lead us in the pledge. Stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to
The republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item D is our land acknowledgement statement. Superintendent, can you lead us in the land acknowledgement statement?
Absolutely. It is respectful to recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between indigenous people and their traditional territories. We acknowledge that we are on the historic homeland of the Red Little people within the original territory of Taos Pueblo. This acknowledgement will oblige as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to respectfully recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Red Little people whose land and water we benefit from this great valley today.
Thank you, Superintendent. Item E is approval of the meeting agenda. I believe it's pretty straightforward. Can I have a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
I make a motion.
Second.
We've got a motion in the second, motion from Board Member King, second from Vice President.
Board Member Porchop.
Yes.
Board Member King.
Yes.
Secretary Trio.
Yes.
Vice President Sprague. Yes. President Flores.
Yes, item F, public comment. Anybody wishing to speak in public comment?
There's Member Mike.
Mr. Hall, thank you for stepping up. We appreciate your comments, but we've had a long morning. If you could try to be as concise as possible and keep it around 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it.
I think I can do that. This is all on the fly and sort of ad hoc. I'm gathering enough after the meeting. In response to talks about nutrition and transportation, I just handed Mr. Flores a conceptual idea about pickups. I'm concerned about students that have to they have to be out the door at 6. They need to be asleep at that time. And so that was sort of a conceptual idea of how to pick students up in the morning to get them to school. So they don't have to be up at 5:30 or 6 or something. At a recent meeting, there was discussion of Panorama, and I heard it talked about before, didn't know what it was. Now I know what it is. Student information, student privacy. Considering what Elon Musk is up to, I'm fearful about all that student data in Panorama and the possibility of somebody like some evil, malicious person like Musk and his cohort hacking into the Department of Education kind of information. So that disturbs me greatly, the words of Musk. We're facing a deconstruction of public education. I'm looking now at February 17, 2025, Department of Education announcement. U.S. Department of Education cuts over $600 million in devices, teacher training grants. I'm reading now. The U.S. Department of Education today announced that we terminated over $600 million in grants to institutions, nonprofits that were using taxpayer funds to train teachers and education agencies on advising ideologies, training materials, and inappropriate, unnecessary topics. which is critical race, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, social justice, activism, anti-racism, and instruction on white privilege and white supremacy. Additionally, many of these grants include teacher and staff recruiting strategies implicitly and explicitly based on race. This is also very troubling. Consequently, what I'd like to see this community, I'd like to see the board voice their dissent and actually challenge what's going on. I understand that letters were sent, and I don't know if I'd like to think that the school got one, or the schools got one from the education department saying, you can't do this, we're not going to give you funds. There was an executive order in the letter that followed up on it. And what I'd like to see is, I'd like to see this community and the board challenge that and say, here, this is what we're doing, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, and we will continue to do it in the future. That's our response to your letter. And see if they want to send us. I'm serious. I really do want to challenge the destruction of our public education in terms of both the public education department and what happens at our local school districts.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you very much. Item G, board norms, responsibilities and roles training provided by Ms. Elena Gallegos from Walsh and Gallegos, Kyle Robinson and Rolson firm.
Good afternoon, everyone. You have had quite a day, and I am going to be respectful of that. I'm really glad that, in retrospect, the materials are what they are in terms of not a lot of law, because we've talked a lot of law, but really kind of a self-reflection on issues that we've talked about. President Flores, of course, in this context, I welcome comments as we go along from the board. But I want you to know that you all have been at this. And I think that the materials that I have are lean and invite reflection and discussion, but aren't, filled with a lot of dense legal materials. So I think hopefully you'll find it valuable. I'm also aware that some folks, some board members may be looking at, they're watching other commitments too. And so I'll be mindful of direct me as you need to. The materials themselves aren't long. I think if it were just straight talk, we'd be out of here, 45 minutes to an hour. But I suspect there'll be some conversation. And again, I can always pick up pace or skip. So again, I'll try and be sensitive to your look. And you can be as assertive as you need to as well with me. But I want to commend you all for what was an amazing day that you had. I got in about 12:45 and got the privilege of seeing you in action and actually thinking about these materials while I watched you, which was quite honestly really moving to me. You guys are working so hard to elevate what you do, and you come to it with such conscientiousness that it's moving to someone sitting out here as public looking on. And so I am not here to preach to you today. I know that the underlying legal principles of everything we're going to talk about, you're already well familiar with. And so this is really a check-in. And the one thing I would ask, in part, in the interest of time, because it's been a long day, but also just to stay as healthy a group as possible, is that I think I'm going to really encourage you to self-reflect and not think about what your neighbor next to you may be doing or not doing. Because if all 5 of you self-reflect, then that's going to elevate the board as a whole. And I think not self-reflecting and being distracted by what you think a neighbor board member might be able to do better might not necessarily improve the behavior of that neighbor board member. So just think about, that's kind of my suggestion for this material. Because like I say, we talked about the legal concepts. What I want to get are, how is that translating in practice for you all? And I can see, again, out there, that you all are just elevating your game all the time. And so this is really about refinement. So we're going to start with board norms. But first of all, you do have to go through it now, you're familiar with this. You have the board policies and regulations for handling constituent, oh, is it not? Here, let me, sorry about that. I don't know why it's not. Usually just pops up when it was working earlier. Did it get loose somewhere else? Didn't we retransfer it? Weird. Okay, well, since I'm not referring at this second to the PowerPoint, let me let Maria work on that. And I just want to let you know, you've had this document before. I did add one of the policies that had not been included. But so it is slightly different from what you had before. I'll reference it a little bit, but we won't be reading it today. I just wanted to make sure you had this as well. And we will hit it, but not in a lot of dense detail. Yeah. Do you want me to just shut the whole computer down?
No, I have a different document.
Oh, wait, there it is. There it is. Except
Senate Street.
it's an extended meeting. Let me.
There it is.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
It was on vacation. Taking a break.
There, we did it. Okay. All right. Anything you need or want to say to me before I jump in? Okay. All right. So just a quick reminder of the board president's job description. And so I don't know that we need to go through it line by line. But of course, you know, presiding over all meetings, that is his role. I always find it fascinating, you know, watching board presidents trying to sometimes herd cats. It's a difficult role. I think you all are really working on recognizing his role in the meetings. I've noticed some really good waiting to get his attention before speaking, and some of those things that need to be done for an orderly meeting. Of course, the board president calls special or emergency meetings, consults with the superintendent on the agenda. I think you all have really good norms for that. His job is to encourage and maintain orderly and democratic participation, keep all discussions factual and on the subject at hand, allow for full and complete exploration of each item of business. So those are the three things I want to hit, just to remind you that when your board president is engaging in that behavior, that's the job you guys through policy have tasked him with. And so while sometimes it may seem picky, the one thing or sometimes may seem inconvenient, especially when you're the one trying to speak out or make a point. I just want to remind you that if we don't do that consistently and across the board in every situation, regardless of the content or the merit, then we end up with a breakdown of those norms. So again, I want to just reinforce that. The rules of order, I won't read through that, but I do think that we cleared up a few things last time in terms of the president's ability to make or second motions and vote on all motions. I had the privilege and the pleasure of speaking to the town of Taos a couple of weeks ago, and it was in that process of looking at the municipality rules that I realized that there really are differences between municipality and board, school board. And so it better made sense to me, since there's historically been such a municipality presence on the Taos Municipal Schools Board, why there's been questions over the years about some of these norms. So unlike a municipality, the president can make or second motions and may vote on all motions. So that's just one of the things I wanted to mention there. Wanted to remind you about your policy with regard to agenda setting and how that works, and there are timelines around it. You're to notify the superintendent if you want an item on the agenda at least 5 business days before the meeting agenda is finalized, and at least 8 days prior to the meeting. And of course, finalized has to do with finalized for purposes of the 72-hour requirement of the Open Meetings Act. And then the superintendent consult with the board president on when it ends up on the agenda. So, but you guys are all also, you have that process that I witnessed again today, where at the end of each board meeting, as part of the agenda, the board president invites you to give voice to what things you might want on a future agenda. Just a reminder that sometimes the amount of items on the agenda might cause the board president and superintendent to delay your item to a later meeting. All kinds of things can factor into that. I did want to hit consent agenda. I put it on here, and I mean, this is just something to think about. When you use the term consent agenda, what you're really doing is foregoing discussion. You can always pull an item off the consent agenda. If you're looking, and when you do that, is you do that at the point where the agenda is being approved. Okay, not at the point where you get to the consent agenda to vote on it. So if you want to tighten that up a little bit, I was pleased to see that BEDBR actually addresses it. It talks about how items will be put on the consent agenda, that items can be removed from the consent agenda for discussion at the point that you're approving the agenda. But if you approve the agenda and left all items on the consent agenda, there would not be the courtesy, and your president is careful to be courteous, but he doesn't owe you the courtesy of saying, does anyone have any questions or comments? Because it's a consent agenda. And so if it's still on the consent agenda, what that really means is you go immediately and just call for a vote. And so a couple of things, if your board president decides to do that strictly, then you need to be attentive to ahead of time examining that consent agenda, so that if you really do have questions or want to make a comment about one of those items, the time you pull it off is when the motion is made to approve the agenda. And then you just say, I'd like to pull off item 3C from the consent agenda. And then it stands alone, and then you can ask your questions or make your comments. But if you don't do it then technically you really aren't entitled to ask questions or comment on the items on the consent agenda. Now, the one thing that naturally, when I see it being followed like that occurs, is if too many things are getting stuck into consent agenda that really do warrant discussion, that becomes a point of tension. And so I always make sure that, I remind the superintendent, don't use the consent agenda to basically avoid a public vetting of an issue. But again, reminder, you can have it pulled off. And so just because it's on doesn't mean that it has to stay on there. So again, just in terms of thinking about.
Vice President Chair, Elena, thank you. A question, how would the recommendation be to a good balance between allowing for public vetting, right? And then consent agenda, because some of the trainings that we've gone to in some of the districts that have streamlined their board meetings, so they're not 4, 6, 8 hours, is they do place a few items on consent agenda. So is there any type of guidance or recommendation? I know it's up to the board, but
Yeah.
give it a good balance.
Yeah, I've observed good balance. So first of all, your day-to-day was amazing. And so you've vetted a lot of issues today. And so because you vetted it, everything about your finance committee today was public. You complied with the Open Meetings Act in it, then I would hate to see you feeling like you've got to revet some of those issues at the next board meeting. You vetted them. And so anything that might be a carryover where there's already been a question, questions asked and reports shared and things vetted, those are the kinds of things that are logical for consent agendas. So my boards that have a full board in finance committee, those are all consent agenda items and no discussion because they've already been vetted in finance committee. If you have a really thorough, even 2-person board finance committee, usually if they've gone through some kind of vetting process already, those are the things that are logical for consent agenda. Also, you're gonna wanna make sure that your materials that you submit to go along with consent agenda items, that those anticipate questions and address those questions, and that the board's getting their packet early enough to digest those materials. Because a board member's gonna take an item off the consent agenda if they have questions. And then anything of high interest to the public, where, you know, you would never put like a cell phone policy on the consent agenda. You know, I've had boards feel suspicious about that, like, you know, why was this put on the consent agenda when this is something of such high public interest? Where the public needs to hear the board care and ask those hard questions and hear the direct answers. But things that have been vetted, yes, consent agenda, things that, because the public will have access to through IPRA to the board packet. And so things that are well vetted in the board packet, consent agenda.
Thank you for clarifying this. One of the things that for board moms is we have very long meetings and I mean, of course, it's the board meeting, not mine. But I would love to see how we can try to collectively, bring that down as well.
So I'm hoping that some of these questions, so now we're past the policy discussion and into the self-reflection, might kind of help you. And some of this you may want to make more than just a self-reflection and talk as a group about it. But I think some of these things might help address what you just raised about length of the meeting. So these are how are we doing questions. So do we have good board member attendance? One of the things too I see is, like, for example, if you did have a finance committee meeting like today, you're all here. You can imagine that in-depth discussion, if two of you hadn't been here, then those two people are going to the next board meeting and they're wanting to talk about what you all have already vetted. And so that undermines the effectiveness of the board. And I know that you all have work lives, all of you, outside of your board duties. And so I'm not chastising people in any way for the practical reality of sometimes you can't be here. But I do think it's important to recognize just practically how that impacts the flow of the meeting. Is when someone's absent, even if they, I mean, I suppose if they were to watch the entire stream, that's the beauty of it being recorded and streamed, or the recorded streaming, that would help, but there's no substitute for being here. And again, if the majority of the board has vetted it and one board member or two board members aren't there, it will impact the subsequent meetings. So do we have good board member attendance? Is there too much virtual rather than in-person attendance by members? And so the only thing I wanted to remind you of is that the Open Meetings Act, and I could see with advancements in technology, that this could change over time, because if the Open Meetings Act was last revised pre-pandemic and pre-things like Zoom and Google Meets. But currently in the Open Meetings Act, the Attorney General says that, first of all, you can only participate telephonically or virtually if your policy allows it, which it does. And if it's difficult or impossible for the member of the public body to be there. So impossible is a little bit more of an obvious standard than difficult, right? But I do think that that you need to be mindful that the Attorney General does frown on virtual participation. I didn't include the policy, I think you all are familiar, but there are also other caveats, like the ability of the member who's participating virtually to have uninterrupted ability to hear everything that's going on, and then the public and the other members to have uninterrupted ability to hear that board member. So there's the other thing where I think it'd be hard in the board president's chair to say to someone who's one of the other board members who's participating virtually, I'm sorry, board member Sprague, but you're not able to maintain connectivity, and so you're not going to be able to participate virtually today. Those are hard things to deliver, but that is law-based, and it does impact how we're doing as a board. So I just wanted to remind you of that. Are our meetings starting on time? I mean, the start time is critical, and I attend lots of board meetings It's not an unusual week for me if I've been in 3 board meetings that week. And so, you know, there's a variety of norms. I have one board that's very community oriented. They always have a meal ahead of time. And the meal sometimes causes a delay in the start time by a good 30 minutes. That's just the norm, and it seems to work. So again, I'm here judgment free, but as you all are looking at kind of how you elevate your game, starting on time is one way you respect one another. And you know, to the president, I know how hard it is when you know someone's on their way. It feels like you're almost being rude to start when you know they're on their way. But the truth is, if you start, whether they're here or not, it might help them next time get there at the start. So again, these are all things.
If I could just make a comment on that, that's something I'd like to address. If we could try to start our meetings on time for the respect of the other people that are in attendance, such as staff and so forth. I know we're very lucky that they serve us food, but I can't recall going back on any historical meeting as of recent where we actually start at 6 o'clock. We start at 6:15. By the time we go through the approval of the agenda and all the other items, by the time we actually get down to business, it's, you know, 6:30 or further. So I would like to express to the board, if you're gonna be late, that's one thing, you know, because there are conflicting schedules, but if we're here and we're present, I would like us to try to start at 6 p.m. if there is food or if there is not food. So I just want to voice that. And I think we're all aware that I don't think we've started any of our meetings on time. They say 6 p.m. They don't start at 6 p.m. I try to be here at least 15 minutes prior to and be set up and ready to start. I think we all need to be here ready to start a meeting at 6 p.m. My comments.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I did want to say too that sometimes after presentations like this, people will say, well, did someone tell you everything we were, like, I didn't know that. The things I've put out here are things that boards at varying levels struggle with. So, I do support President Flores and what he's saying. And again, President Flores, my own thought is you just start whether they're here or not, as long as you have a quorum. And then that, I think, will drive home the point that you're serious about starting. If you don't have a quorum, obviously you can't start, but the minute you have a quorum and the clock hits 6, or the clock has already hit 6, I would start. I think it will shape behavior. And again, we're all human, so I'm not here to judge. I'm just saying, I think it will shape behavior. It would shape mine, that's for sure. Okay, so other etiquette and norm things that again, and some of this too, I think President Flores just talked about respect of staff. I know that the stress behind the scenes of putting on, you know, a good board meeting for the board, giving you the information that you need, anticipating your questions, responding. And so some of this too is not just your respect for one another and the public, but the staff as well. So our board members on their cell phones or other devices during a meeting. And I know sometimes, I mean, I try very hard. I don't look, in fact, I tell other clients if I'm going to a board meeting, once I get there, I'm not going to be looking at my cell phone because I'm there on that board's time, not anybody else's time. But sometimes, you know, you may have a sick child or a sick parent at home, or you may be running late and need to pick up the phone and warn someone that you're running late. So those things happen. You can usually tell. I mean, as an observer, I can usually tell when it's that kind of a quick message versus someone engaged in another conversation. The someone engaged in another conversation, first of all, it raises an OMA issue, Open Meetings Act, because the public is entitled to observe what's going on. And if you're engaged in a texting conversation or email conversation with a member of the public about what's being discussed, it could be, or with anybody about what's being discussed, the rest of the public is being denied the ability to observe it. So you've got an Open Meetings Act issue. You also, and I've had that happen, know that if you're here in your capacity as a board member, even if it's your personal device, it's subject to IFRA requests for what was board member Gallegos texting during the board meeting. And you're going to be turning over those texts to someone to move on to the IFRA. So again, this is really about some discipline, and, you know, letting family and loved ones know that you're limited once you take the dais. But again, the pure personal of we're running late, I'm sorry, I'll be home shortly, or how's your fever, you know, that sort of thing. The truth is you'd have to turn them over to your custodian, but the custodian would be able to withhold those as purely personal. But if you're engaging at all in discussion about what's being talked about on the agenda, those are public records, even if they're on your personal device. Do board members appear attentive or inattentive during the meeting? Again, I know we're tired, we're distracted. It always amazes me when people reflect back to me the look on my face during a meeting and what they think. Usually I'm thinking three items ahead, you know, or thinking about things in the meeting that is not what people think I'm thinking about, but there are people intently trying to read your faces. And so just be mindful that that appearance of attentive or inattentive really matters to the staff who worked hard to prepare and be here for you. And then the public who are also observing you. Our board members stepping in and out of the meeting. You know, obviously this is a long day. I don't know how many bathroom breaks you all have had. And so, you know, it certainly doesn't bother me when you step away. But again, these are all things to begin thinking about. I know, because I see it on the face of the other board members, what's hard is when a board member does step out and they come in and then they ask the very question that has already been asked and answered during the time that they stepped out. So all of those things affect the flow. It affects the beginning and ending time. It affects the cohesiveness of the board. It affects the confidence that the public and the staff have in you. The other thing too, I will say is minutes and quorum implications. I don't know that this is an issue at all here. I've never witnessed it here, but I have been in board meetings, especially where maybe you already have one person absent, that you might have two people step out. And then you've lost your quorum. And so I do think at that point, it's going to be important that the minutes note and that there's a pause so that you get your quorum back, even if it's just discussion. So those are all things to think about in terms of how what you're doing impacts the rest of the group. Okay. Get more reflection and I'm not trying to speed this up. So if any of you want to say something, you feel free or ask for clarification. So the other thing too, I think you guys are good at this, but I just want to reinforce it. Are you making requests to have items placed on the agenda as permitted by board policy? So remember that one of your most powerful tools as board members is getting something on the agenda. I think I've probably said this to you, but I've always been fascinated by the research that says that in terms of a successful diet, that what makes a diet successful, in other words, people, you know, lose weight, is the piece of observing your own behavior. You're writing down when you eat every day, which diet, Mediterranean or keto, or I don't even know what they all are, but which diet you're doing is actually less important than the fact that you're writing down what you ate every day. You're observing it. And so my view is that even on those things that you know, that you may have limited authority over other than the very high level policy issue or level, is that asking for a report on it on the agenda is going to speak to how important it is to you. And you guys do reflect, like I know how important community schools are to you because you use the platform of the agenda to prioritize that. And that's not true of every school district. And so in terms of things like community schools, I know that you're very concerned about the state of your facilities. I know that just by the little bit of time I've spent here observing you all. I know that the real estate, the issues and challenges in your district, its impact on staff the ability to recruit, all of that is an important thing to you. So just remember that your agenda is a powerful tool and you can use that to be highly effective. On the other hand, you don't want to be wasting time on agenda items, back to how long your meetings are lasting, that don't reflect your priorities. So if you're going to do goal setting, the other thing too, I would make sure is what does that goal setting do in relationship to your strategic plan and in relation to any goals you may have set for the superintendent? Are we creating so many goals that we've kind of diluted them? And then how does our agenda fit in relationship to those? Are we doing, a mix of high priority and then really low priority that may be diluting our high priority items? Is the agenda sufficiently specific? I know you all heard me talk about the OMA, Open Meetings Act requirements for specificity, so I won't go into that. But I also think it helps in the discipline of running a good meeting. That the agenda item needs to be specific so that, and that's the next bullet, board members are staying on the agenda topic and not veering off. And also presenters are staying on the agenda topic and not veering off. So under OMA, we have to be sufficiently specific so that if community member Gallegos is trying to decide whether she's going to come and watch your meeting or get online and watch your meeting, she needs to be able to look at the agenda and go, oh, I care about that subject, or I don't care about that subject. And so if you get on in a very global description and start going into areas that community member Gallegos could not have anticipated, you may have violated the Open Meetings Act. Or if you start veering off either the presenter or the board from that specifically stated item, you may have violated the Open Meetings Act. And by doing these two things, not only do you comply with the Open Meetings Act, but you're just running a cleaner, tighter board meeting. And so the next bullet item is really what we just talked about, is the agenda focusing on the right stuff. And then our presentations, too long, too short, or veering off topic. Okay. The other issue too, and it does happen from time to time, and I'm talking about across the state, not you all specifically. When I'm in a board meeting and it's happening, it's always that like cringe moment for me. But our board members raising issues that are confidential under Open Meetings Act or IPRA or other laws. And so I try to come up with examples. Personally identifiable student information. So you may have gone to Special Olympics, or you may have gone and observed a special ed class, and you're so excited that you observed that special ed class and you want to recognize a student, and you call out the student by name and indicate that you were there in the special ed class. You well-meaning, what have you just done? You just violated that child's rights. So it can happen really easily. Personnel matters, same thing. There's a reason that we go into executive session to discuss personnel matters. There's a reason that there's a level of protection on personnel matters under IPRA. Of course, not everything about personnel is confidential, but if you're starting to get into personnel performance in any way, that could be problematic. And I just tried to list the things that are protected. Certain purchases in excess of $2,500, like sole source or competing offers. Purchase, acquisition, disposal of real property, all of those are things that are protected for obvious reasons. And again, in your enthusiasm, your advocacy, you might say something that actually breaches the confidentiality in a way that harms the district. So just a reminder on that. And attorney-client privilege. I know it feels really good to be able to say, but our lawyer told us. And everything after told us is going to be a problem in terms of attorney-client privilege. And so, so you want to be really careful about that. Some other examples, tactical response plans. This is a big issue these days because we're having to do these safety and security plans, including in the area of technology. And I don't recall, and you don't need to tell me here, but whether you've been through one of those horrible ransom experiences, but the tactical response plans in terms of safety, and then information concerning your technology systems that would reveal specific vulnerabilities. You don't want to be vetting these in open meetings. And so if you've got your IT person talking about the system, you don't want to start talking about asking questions about its vulnerabilities or in safety as well. If you have some questions about these that you want to vet, my recommendation is that you go to the superintendent first and you make sure that you're clear with the superintendent about what part of those plans are confidential and not to be brought up here. If you're asking those questions to a director or someone who's standing here in at this presentation podium, they're going to be uncomfortable not answering your question. They may not on the spot be able to quickly vet it and say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question in public. And so be mindful of the sensitivities around those things. All right, I wasn't meaning to speed talk, but that gets us to the end. Any global comments that you all want to make? And I'm hoping that for the most part, you're seeing that as a group. I think you all are maturing. You've all been now on the board a while, and I'm seeing good stuff from the outside looking in. But and then I don't know, President Flores, if there's anything you heard that you want to also just alert everyone that you're thinking you may be emphasizing more as part of the ones.
No, I think you touched on it a lot. I think one thing that I want to try to highlight is that we all tend to want to express our points and reflect maybe on some of our past experiences or whatever it may be. But a lot of times I feel like, and I'm going to say myself also, but we could be long-winded. And our comments, there's 5 board members here, and if each board, and we welcome comments and questions from the board, but if they are not concise and clear and specific to the items at hand, 5 board member comments at 2-3 minutes each, every time we have a comment for every presentation or subject matter, that I think what is drawing our meetings on. Now, I don't want to say don't comment or don't question, but I think really in reflecting our comments meaningful, and I'm talking about myself, specifically, and I could work on this myself. If they're not specific and meaningful to the subject at hand, we're drawing out our meetings a lot longer than they need to be. So if we could just work on our questions and comments, we could really expedite and allow for our meetings to be more concise.
Yeah, and there are times too where, like I thought today, you guys handled the questions on the bonds. You raised the issues. President Flores a couple of times said, this isn't for action item. Let's get this on a future agenda. And I thought you all did an excellent job of definitely being respectful to the presenter who had been here, sounding like a good part of the day, and adequately letting him present and vetting his issues, but then also gave everybody the assurance that we'll get this on a future agenda and continue to, hit it at deeper levels. So I do think it's happening, but all of my boards right now are asking the question, how do we tighten up the meeting? And the truth is, for, things at the national level are affecting us right now. And things are in flux. Now, some of the monies that you were talking about today, you may be faced with questions about what we do in the absence of some of those monies. And so board meetings are taking longer as we navigate moving parts. And so I think that, again, practicing discipline around all of these issues are going to help us prepare us to deal with, I think, the serious issues of our times. Okay, which takes us to the next topic. And again, I am not going to drill down at the level that you all have heard me drill down. This is also how are we doing? So this document outlines the policies that we're going to be talking about, but I'm just going to ask you the how are you doing? How are we doing questions? So policy BHD outlines communications with the public. And so I'm just going to call upon you, not asking you to verbalize, but call upon you to think about, are you sharing with any member of the public what is discussed in executive session? And sometimes, again, that can happen inadvertently. And so just a reminder of how important it is to keep those conversations confidential. Are you promising anonymity when a member of the public approaches you with a concern? What I really want you to continue to practice, and I know you all are doing it, you're practicing it, but I want you to continue to practice at the minute that someone says, I need this to be just between you and me. That's a trigger for me. And I've had to practice it all of my career. When someone says that phrase to me, I cut them off. And I say, I can't promise you that. You may tell me something that I have an obligation to come forward with. So work on your elevator phrase for that. How are you handling requests to keep things confidential? They won't disrespect you if you're honest and straight up, especially to catch them before they tell you the rest of what they want to tell you. They will respect you, especially if you hand them a policy after that. And so that takes us to this next piece. And this is the policy KE, which to me goes hand in hand with VHD. Policy KE is community concerns and complaints. And so along these lines, and I'm phrasing it this way in terms of self-reflection, but I'm also trying to give you concrete tips. Are you asking the community member whether they have taken their concerns to the building level administrator? Now, some of their concerns aren't at the building level. So if it's not at the building level, then you would obviously jump up in your question. Are you asking the community member whether they have taken their concern to the superintendent? Are you telling the community member that the board will not consider or act on complaints that have not been explored at the appropriate administrative level? That just can't happen. So you might as well give them the courtesy of telling them that that can't happen. Again, they will respect you. I think some of the things that we feel like we have to be the solution. But you really are the one that provides the map for them. And if they can see that you're providing a map for them, they will appreciate it. And so I do think it's important that you reflect on what does will not consider or act on mean? Because if really behind the scenes, you're considering and acting on it. And then it's affecting how you view the administration, how you view the superintendent, how you view your fellow board members. Have you considered and even possibly acted on it? And so I think this is about sort of self-discipline and conditioning yourself that no, if it's not been explored at the appropriate administrative level, you are not going to entertain it. You are not going to let it plant a seed of doubt in your mind because it's not gone through the levels. I just on Friday, and I promise you this has nothing to do with you all, just had that whole vetting piece of a serious issue that a parent wanted to circumvent all of the processes and go straight to the board. And when I started looking at those processes, I thought one of those steps was having the employee have an opportunity to have 5 business days to respond in writing to the allegations. There is value to that process. Until you even know what that employee has to say about it, how can you sit and think about it when they've not been afforded that level of due process? And so I think it's going to be important for you to, as you're setting these policies, to look at what are the principles underlying it, and then be ambassadors, be believers in it and ambassadors in it, so that you're not just, so that the person doesn't feel like they've been put off, and so you don't feel like you put them off in this process. That you will not consider or act upon anything that has not been explored at the appropriate administrative level. And then I think the most powerful thing is to hand somebody something. Now that might be electronically where you email them something, but if you've given me something, I can hardly say that you ignored me. If you've given me something. And so what would you give that community member? A copy of policy. You're going to give them 3 things. You're going to give them a copy of policy KE, a copy of regulation KER, and the form KEE. 3 things you will have given them and not in any way violated your responsibilities as a board member. Okay, those are general complaints concerns. What about the hard one of complaints concerns about personnel? And so here we go, policy KEB, which again is outlined in that other document for you. Are you telling the concerned person that all complaints must be referred to the superintendent for investigation? Are you telling the concerned person that the employee involved must be given an opportunity? In fact, this was the policy I was dealing with on Friday. must be given an opportunity at each administrative level at which the matter is reviewed for explanation, comment, and presentation of facts, either formally or informally. Now, my whole career has been dealing with people's different versions of a story. And so at this point in my career, I know that there are different versions of the same event. I know that. I don't ever expect that there's a single version. And so as hard as it is when someone comes to you with a really compelling version, you've got to go back to this concept of due process, that if the person being accused is never given the opportunity for review, explanation, comment, and presentation of the facts, that just, it really is a fundamental violation of rights. Are you telling the concerned person, and this is a piece that's important, if we're not talking about the superintendent, the way that policy reads and regulation is that the superintendent is the final level of review. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that's not right. And this isn't the grievance policy. This is the complaints about personnel policy. But even in the grievance policy, that policy is careful to extract out those things that we all refer to as House Bill 212 items, right? The separation of authority between a board and the superintendent. The superintendent is the only employer of those other employees. Now, there are times like a discharge or a termination. We just had one of those a few weeks ago, where it does come before the board. There are certain kinds of grievances that might come before the board. But for the most part, that is their employer, the gentleman sitting at the end of this table, not the board. And so again, emphasizing that so that the employee doesn't feel misled, misunderstood about about the board, about the board's role, and ultimately, understands that you're not letting them down. That just is the way the law is. And again, you're not ignoring them. You're going to be sending them 3 items: policy KEB, regulation KEBR, and form KEBE. And on all of these, I think it's important that you get it in their hand and you let them know that there may be timelines that they need to follow. So that if these stories don't just drag out, and hopefully it gets resolved. And people become self-disciplined. Sometimes they want to like dump on these. They just want to dump the things that are bothering them on you, so that you're kind of left with that toxic burden or toxic baggage. And I think, again, being disciplined about how you respond to them, reminding them that they've got certain responsibilities, including timelines. And rather than you tell me your story, since I can't do anything about it, I'm going to go straight home and I'm going to email you the policies. You see how that kind of response sets the appropriate boundaries and it doesn't ignore their concern. Okay, instructional resources. So our gentleman is always so invested in the work of public bodies, brought up the recent executive order having to do with DEI. You all may not have been hit with this yet, but I can tell you I'm sitting in board meetings across the state where there's sort of a renewed concern about instructional resources. And so there are policies governing public concerns and complaints about instructional resources. So again, this is an area where from whatever perspective the person approaching you may have, it's going to be important that you channel their energy into the proper policy. So are you telling the concerned person that there's a form they will need to fill out? Like, it's the first thing I would say. That's not weighing in on the pros and cons of their view. That's viewpoint neutral, right? It's telling them up front there's a form they'll need to fill out. Are you telling the concerned person that the superintendent will review their completed form and the instructional resource and issue a written decision and notify them of the decision? You see how powerful that promise is? And then you're not even getting into the merits of what their concern is, but you're promising them something. You're promising them that if they fill out a form, that the superintendent's going to review the very instructional resource that they're upset about. And then the superintendent is going to give them a written decision and notify them of that decision. You have promised them 3 things without stepping outside of your boundaries. Are you telling the concerned person that the concern can only come to the board if they are not satisfied with the decision of the superintendent? Now, the beauty of that is under this, it can come to you. But if you start engaging in either sympathy or debate with them, either one is problematic. Sympathy with or debate with them, you've undermined that step of the superintendent. And so how much better if it does come to you that you didn't weigh in, because you're also weighing in on a resource that's being described to you that is not in front of you either. And so you want to be disciplined about that step so that if it does come to you, then what are you getting? You're getting not only the resource, and I've also across the state been involved in book ban efforts. And so you don't want to be weighing in on something you haven't read, you haven't looked at, and it hasn't gone to the process of a written decision by the superintendent that you are then evaluating. So this isn't ignoring the concerned person, it's validating their concern and the avenues they have to deal with their concern. And so again, are you giving the person a copy of board policy KEC and the form KEC? And I would want to make sure not only that you're just like vaguely saying, oh, we have a policy on it, look up our policies, make sure that they get the form, because the form helps ensure that then when it comes to the superintendent, he has all of the information about what it is they're finding objectionable. And that's really true regardless of what complaint we're talking about, but in this area, it's particularly valuable. So you can see, there's categories to all of the policies. This is the corollary, but with regard to facilities and services. So the policy KED is the policy about public concerns and complaints about facilities and services. Are you telling the concerned person that this issue must first go to the site administrator? And here they actually have levels. It reads more like your grievance policy. So it has to go level 1. And then it next goes to the superintendent level 2. And are you telling the concerned person that they are not satisfied with the superintendent's response? Then they can appeal to level 3. Are you telling them that there's a form that they can fill out? And are you giving the concerned person a copy of board policy KDE, KEDR, and KEDE? Now I want to just pause here and give you one other sort of angle to pivot on. So someone has come to you, they've talked to you about a deplorable facility situation. You've followed all of this. You've given them the policy and the form. You've stuck by your script, walked away really proud, but inside you, now you're worried about that facility. What do you do?
Talk to superintendent.
You can go to the superintendent. I would not try and investigate and not be straight up with the superintendent. If you want to go look at the facility yourself, and then go to the superintendent, you say, there's been a concern, and if I were you, I would say, well, let's go together. Let's figure this out. Let's go. Excuse me, I don't know when.
I would also advise Ms. Gallegos, for a board member to also go to the board president also, because sometimes there's issues amongst board members and superintendents. So when you go to the board president and discuss it as two board members are more powerful than one, the board president can say, board member so-and-so came to me. We would like to get this addressed. Just, I think, hold more weight also.
That's a really good point. The other thing too, I wanted to bring up is don't forget where I started earlier, which is the power of the agenda. And I was trying to kind of think through hypotheticals when I was working on this. And so I grinned when your financial advisor commented about the facilities master plan. Because that was with this hypothetical, I'm thinking, what you don't want to do is you want the community member to learn the same discipline that you're following, which is, ma'am or sir, here's your process, go out and follow it. And you don't want to rescue them from that process. But if you also got concerns, you could use the power of the agenda to consider adding to the agenda a discussion of the facilities master plan. So in my mind, and then of course the gentleman said it's time for you all to update your facilities master plan. But that was like to me a perfect situation, because then if you were to say after you have hear about this deplorable facility situation, you go to the board president and superintendent and say, you know, I'm hearing concerns in the community about our facilities. Can we put on the agenda an update on the facilities master plan? And then you see the sequence that would trigger based on just what we heard today. Then it would trigger the superintendent pulling that and saying, it's out of date. And then the next thing that logically happens, right, is updating it. And so I want you to see that it's not that you're powerless. It's looking at where do your powers lie and how do you use those in a transparent, effective way.
You just helped us with the agenda item. The superintendent's writing it down, because it's true. Well, it's, Elena, it's just, and it's, you know, my daughter went to the middle school and it's amazing how clean and how nice that old building is. I mean, it's
Oh,
absolutely,
there are some old buildings that are just amazing.
you
yeah.
just wanna like, just,
No, I know.
bless the whole staff, but
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, it's, yeah, definitely.
So, I think one of the hardest ones is when employees come to you. And I think it's the hardest thing for any board member. So yes, there's policies, there's the staff grievance policy, GBK. There's BHC that really limits your role, board communications with staff members, what you can and can't say. And then, if they're under the collective bargaining agreement, they're part of the bargaining unit, then the CBA. So there's really two policies and the CBA. So what are you telling the employee? Are you telling the employee that all employees are required to attempt to resolve their concerns at the lowest possible level and follow the chain of command? If you don't, you might be setting them up for an adverse employment action, because their failure to do that is insubordination. And so you have just set up the person that you're trying to help for an adverse employment action against them, which would be completely legitimate under the policy. So don't help them to their detriment. Are you telling the employee that knowingly circumventing the chain of command can constitute insubordination? Are you telling the employee that the board has an employee grievance policy and that it lays out steps and timelines for grievance? If you're engaging in multiple conversations with them, you may have aided and abetted them to miss their own timelines. Again, do you think you're helping them, but you're actually hurting them? Are you telling the employee that if they are covered by the CBA, their CBA also has a grievance procedure with steps and timelines? Are you telling the employee that it is very important that they comply with the timelines in policy or the CBA? I see all the time grievances being denied for the sole reason that they missed their timelines. Are you telling the employee that only certain types of grievances can come before the board and that's only after exhausting the lower levels? Are you encouraging the employee to reach out to their union rep? It's not, if they're part of a union, you're not their only savior. In fact, you're not a savior at all. And you can get them into trouble. And so their union rep is where they should be going. Are you giving the employee a copy of policies, BHC, GBK, regulation, GBKR, forms, GBK, EA, EB, EC, ED, and EE? So there are things you can put in their hands to say, yes, that board member took me seriously. They sent me this stuff. Now, what I often hear, and that's across the state, is, but when they come to me because they're afraid. And so we have a policy on that. That's board policy GBP, which I did not add. I meant to add to this document. This is going to be my growing document for you all, and I'll update it each time I come. But that's the whistleblower retaliatory action policy, the prohibited personnel practices policy, and it includes the whistleblower protection act. And so in it, it's very clear that the retaliation is prohibited. Now, here's what I want you to hear from me. Is if they follow the chain of command, they can't be retaliated against. If they go to you and circumvent the chain of command, that's insubordination, and they can be disciplined for that. That's not retaliation, because they were insubordinate. And so again, that's why you need, it may be counterintuitive, but sometimes your effort to help them is actually hurting them. And so if they're fearful, you give them policy GBP and let them know. That mandate, and that protection against retaliation is supposed to be posted across the district. And I'm seeing Superintendent nod. So is that what you're nodding about? We have those posters? Good. And it's supposed to be kept in conspicuous places. And so, you know, it might be interesting for you all as you walk through schools, just observe where it's kept. Teachers lounge, I don't know where they're kept.
We just went through one of this specific, like, the place, let's go.
Very nice, very nice. And you come from an HR background, so you know this well. And so I think, you know, even being able to say, maybe it's not their facility where they work at, but even being able to say, and Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, I was just at a school yesterday and I saw the poster. So those are things that, again, kind of learning the phraseology to be able to talk to them in a way that actually helps them, doesn't hinder them, keeps you self-disciplined and helps them become self-disciplined in how they solve these problems. So, and then this just briefly takes us back to leveraging the agenda to address the global concerns. Because the truth is sometimes it's hard to get those conversations out of your head. And so you need to go back through, is there a global concern at heart here that I might be able to address through the power of the agenda?
President Flores, Vice President Sprague, members of board, and then I have a quick question. So is talking about the second bullet for placing the agenda, that it can't have an impact, correct, on that one, the second bullet? That can't have an impact on length and durations of agendas, of board meetings, correct?
The more items on the agenda, sure.
Okay.
Sure, that's why ultimately when a request comes in, if you've got 20 requests, you're gonna sit down with the board president and say, how many can we do this time?
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But it's still, you know, I have boards that are very unified and this is important. If it needs to go late, it needs to go late. Like that's why I'm saying you've got to look at where the give is. I'm not trying to say that the best board meeting is a short board meeting.
No,
And
just the impact of
yeah, but
potential.
right, but some of that too is kind of goes back to one of the earlier questions that I think you need to ask is, are we cluttering our agenda with things that are unimportant while we're trying to cram in important things? If we're going so late that to us it feels like too late or too long, it may be that we've got lesser important things that we are just doing out of habit. I've had some boards maybe take a report that instead of doing it once a month, they do it quarterly. You know, they spread some of those that are less important, spread them out and make them quarterly or make them annual or make them biannual or semi-annual rather. So those are all things that in your agenda setting with the board president, you want to have a real productive conversation about those priorities. How long did this meeting last year when we were talking about all these things? How long, you know, do we think this meeting will last? And in light of the high priority items, we want to adjust anything that we do with the lower priority items, including consent agenda. And now that I know that the length of your meeting is an issue, I just want to challenge you to really try and do consent agenda where you don't even give them the courtesy of comment. If they haven't taken a consent agenda item off the consent agenda, then it's an up or down vote on the 5 or 3, 2 items on that consent. And then, you know, your policy does clearly say that the supporting materials will be distributed to the board not less than 72 hours prior to the meeting. So there again, if you're at the approval of the agenda and you didn't get your materials till 24 hours, if you're fine with that because it came in at the last minute, you get why it came in at the last minute. Ms. Geigels was running behind and she didn't get her materials to you on time, and you're willing to forgive her for that. Then you don't have to make an issue of it. But if you really feel unprepared as a result, you can ask that it be removed off the agenda because the materials weren't provided to you 72 hours ahead. So just quickly, the 3 hypotheticals I came up with. Parent complains teacher and educational assistant are always on their cell phones during their recess and lunch duty. I mean, that's a serious complaint, right? That can affect safety, all sorts of things. But again, that needs to go to the superintendent. And so you're going to want to follow that policy that we talked about, going through the levels. It needs to start at the principal level, and the teacher needs to be given an opportunity, the staff, to respond. But the reason I put that on there as a hypothetical is you may also want to know, what are our rules about employee cell phone use? We know what the rules are about student because you were heavily involved in that. Maybe you know the rules about employee, but I don't. And maybe what you want to do is just elevate the whole conversation about supervision and safety by asking to have put on the agenda, for example, or asking the superintendent to see a copy of the policy with regard to employee cell phone use. Citizen complaints in particular facilities and serious disrepair, we've already talked about that, including kind of taking it back to what do you have control over? You have control over the say so in the facilities master plan. And I think this board has always been really good. You know, President Flores has such extensive experience in facilities, and as a result, I think it's elevated always, I've observed since I've been watching you all, elevated the level of conversation and the board's role in understanding of its role in facilities. So definitely, while you're not going to rescue the citizen who's got the concern, you're gonna go ahead and follow that script for how you address the citizen. Separate and apart from that, you certainly can deal with the global nagging inside of you by saying, where are we at with our facilities master plan? And then employee complains that her supervisor is bullying her, but she's afraid to report it because she fears retaliation. Again, you're gonna follow that script, but the whole reason I brought this up too is you're gonna also emphasize that the employee is protected by the Whistleblower Protection Act. And you're gonna make sure that the employee is aware of that policy as well, but also let them know that if they circumvent the chain of command, that's not retaliation. They're in insubordination, and so therefore, for their sake, you're gonna give them the channels they need to follow, and you're gonna emphasize the Whistleblower Protection Act that protects them. All right, I did not mean to talk through this.
That was efficient.
Good job.
That was great.
I hope this was helpful. I feel like you guys have been growing so much that I didn't want to come with the same old materials, but I thought I would just try and give you both a path, a reminder of that path, and kind of ways to kind of reflect on how you approach those situations that every board member is in, no matter what town or city, no matter what school district, and even no matter what state. So I respect you all for what you do and the challenge you find yourself in. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you gave us the manual. I said, is this on your website?
No, this was done for you all.
No, I'm saying, but you gave us the manual. Remember we had this
Yeah,
training?
the last time, but it's in your policy. It's all tied to your policy manual. So you go
So we
to,
can just pull it out.
yeah, you go to, so where I got this, and it's specific to TAUS, these are TAUS policies, is you go to NMSBA's policy portal, and then you go to the drop-down box, and you go to TAUS, and then you look it up by letter.
And we just pull it out.
And you just pull it up, and there is actually, most people don't know about it, even my colleagues, I realize, don't know about it. There's a little arrow up where the title of the policy is, that actually, if you click it right in the right spot, it will allow you to, when it prints it without any of the margin stuff. So it actually goes to your download file, and it saves it in a really nice way where you can attach it, you can print it, attach it. So yeah, so you want to be in a good habit of going to that policy portal, and specific to the TAUS policies, because not all NMSBA policies are identical.
And
Okay.
members of the board, and we also have it on our website.
Okay.
Oh, a link to the portal?
Yes.
Oh, nice, okay, so yeah, I always just go to the portal, because that's,
The go-to.
yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, guys, it was so good to see you. I know it was a long day. I stand for any other questions, President Flores.
Any questions for Ms. Gallegos?
Are you going two-stepping?
My what?
Are you going two-stepping?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, with that being said, we,
That's it.
item H is our upcoming Council School Board meeting, March 26th, that's 2025, 6 p.m. We're also, I believe, have our region meeting at March 31st
Where is Mississippi?
Is that the sign up?
That's in Ojo Caliente.
at Mesa Vista. It's at the Mesa Vista, it's in Ojo Caliente.
Oh, okay, that's how
I'll be there.
close, in other words, okay.
So we have those two standing upcoming meetings, our spring region meeting and our upcoming board meeting. Future topics, any future topics that came to light between the last time and now?
The last half an hour.
Okay, with that being said, so move to adjourn. Second.